Imagine running a business where your absolute best product, like the one making you literally billions of dollars.
Right. The golden goose.
Exactly, the one you spent a decade developing. And it's legally guaranteed to be copied by your competitors on like a very specific date.
Yeah. And not just copy, but legally substituted right at the checkout counter.
Right. Sold for pennies and essentially evaporating your revenue overnight. I mean, that paradox is the daily reality of the pharmaceutical industry.
It is honestly a brutal business model.
Yeah.
You're constantly fighting the physics of, well, a bucket with a hole in the bottom.
A very expensive bucket.
Very expensive.
Yeah.
Because you have a fire hose pouring water in at the top, and that's your new innovative science, your new drugs.
Okay. Yeah.
But the patent expirations at the bottom, they let all your past successes just leak right out onto the floor.
And today, April 28, 2026, we are looking inside one of the largest buckets on the planet.
We really are.
We're taking a deep dive into the newly released Q1 2026 financial and operational results from Novartis.
Huge quarter for them to unpack.
Right. And to do this, we've pulled together their official Q1 investor presentation, the ad hoc announcement press release, and their condensed interim financial report.
It's heavy reading.
Yeah, the really dense stuff. But our mission today is to understand the mechanics of this, like high-stakes tug-of-war happening inside the company.
Right, because what you see in these Q1 documents is this incredible race between launching these hyper-complex new therapies and outrunning the ticking clock of generic competition.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just a masterclass in corporate survival.
So let's unpack the raw macro picture first, just to establish the baseline.
Sure.
For the first quarter of 2026, Novartis reported net sales of $13.1 billion.
Which sounds like a lot, but...
Right, but on the surface, that actually represents a 5% drop in constant currency, or like a 1% drop in straight U.S. dollars.
And just for anyone not staring at financial spreadsheets every day, constant currency just means we're stripping out the chaotic fluctuations of global exchange rates.
Yeah, right, just to see how the actual core business performed.
Exactly. So operationally, their sales shrunk by 5%.
And here's where that tug-of-war becomes really visible in the data. Because if you look at the volume of drugs Novartis actually shipped out to patients...
Oh, the volume numbers are fascinating.
They really are. That volume contributed 13 percentage points to their growth. I mean, they are moving significantly more medicine.
But, and here's the hole in the bucket. That entire gain was completely erased by a 14 percentage point hit from generic competition.
Wow. Just wiped out.
Gone. Plus another 4% drag from pricing adjustments.
So they're doing way more work, reaching more patients, and ultimately making less money.
Yeah, and that flows straight down to the bottom line. I mean, core operating income dropped to $4.9 billion.
Right, which is down 14% in constant currency. And their operating margin compressed down to 37.3%.
It's just a stark mathematical reality of the generic cliff.
Okay, so what does this all mean for the rest of the year? Because, and this is the part of the press release that actually made me stop reading and go back a page.
I think I know which part you mean.
Yeah. Despite sales dropping 5% and operating income plunging 14% in the first quarter, Novartis officially reaffirmed its full year 2026 guidance.
They did?
Like, they are still telling Wall Street they expect net sales to grow in the low single digits for the entire 12 months.
Right.
If your profit is down double digits out of the gate in Q1, how do you confidently reaffirm positive growth? I mean, are they just putting on a brave face here?
Well, it looks entirely contradictory, right, until you look at the underlying curves.
Okay, explain the curves.
So the executive team's confidence comes from what they categorize as their priority brands. These are the newly launched drugs.
The fire hose pouring water into the bucket.
Exactly. The internal modeling suggests that the sheer velocity of these new products will eventually outpace the drag of the generics over the full year.
Wait, really? Just off the new stuff?
Yeah. Because first quarters often show the sharpest year-over-year contrasts when a major patent expires. But as the months go on, the new drugs essentially catch up. They pull the overall numbers back into the grain.
Okay, so if the priority brands are the fire hose, we really need to look at what's actually coming out of that hose.
And it is a lot.
It is. Looking at the data, the growth rates on these specific drugs are just wild. Collectively, these priority growth drivers grew by 34% in constant currency this quarter.
Which For a mature pharmaceutical company is just hypergrowth. That's a huge number.
Right. Let's walk through a few of the standouts because the underlying science kind of explains the financial success here.
Let's do it.
First, you have Kisqali, their breast cancer treatment. That's up 55%, hitting $1.516 billion just in this one quarter.
Massive blockbuster.
Yeah. And you have Kesimpta for multiple sclerosis, up 26% to $1.164 billion. And then you have Leqvio, a cholesterol-lowering drug, up 69% to $452 million.
And what's fascinating here is the mechanics behind Leqvio's 69% jump. It's not just standard marketing.
What's driving it?
A significant portion of that growth is driven by its inclusion in China's National Reimbursement Drug List, or the NRDL.
Oh, wow. Yeah, think about what happens when you get on that list.
Exactly. You are suddenly unlocked for centralized procurement in a country of 1.4 billion people.
It essentially flips a switch, right? Like
Yeah.
from localized regional sales to immediate national scale.
Overnight. And, the list of high performers just continues. Semlix for leukemia is up 79% to $433 million.
Yeah.
And Fabhalta actually more than doubled. It grew 103% to $169 million.
And Fabhalta is a really interesting one to me. The documents note it targets rare blood disorders like PNH.
Yes.
Can we just pause and explain what PNH actually is? Because I think it highlights why these specialized drugs command such a massive premium in the market.
Oh, absolutely. So PNH stands for paroxysmal nocturnal hemoglobinuria.
Say that 3 times fast.
Right. But it is a rare, genuinely life-threatening disease where your immune system mistakenly attacks and destroys your own red blood cells.
Oh, wow. That sounds awful.
It is. Patients suffer from severe anemia, debilitating fatigue, and a huge risk of blood clots.
So what does the drug actually do?
Well, Fabhalta works by essentially inhibiting a very specific part of the immune system, stopping that destruction entirely.
Oh, so it turns off the friendly fire.
Exactly. And because it targets such a specific severe biological error, it fundamentally changes the patient's quality of life. And that is what drives high adoption and, frankly, high revenue.
It's incredible science. But okay, the drug I really want to zoom in on, because the logistics of it basically broke my brain, is Pluvicto.
Oh, yes, Pluvicto.
This is a radioligand therapy for prostate cancer, and it grew 70% to $642 million.
It is arguably their most impressive operational feat, like across the whole company.
Right, because let's think about this physically for a second. A radioligand therapy is radioactive.
Very much so.
You are not manufacturing a standard cholesterol pill, putting it in a plastic bottle and letting it sit on a shelf in a local pharmacy for 6 months.
No, definitely not.
It's literally radioactive material. So how do you physically scale a radioactive drug to 70% global growth?
Yeah, that is the multi-billion-dollar question. So let's break down how Pluvicto actually works.
Okay.
Radioligand therapy involves taking a radioactive isotope, in this case, it's called lutetium-177, and attaching it to a targeting molecule, which we call a ligand.
Okay, a ligand.
Right. That ligand acts like a homing beacon. It seeks out a specific protein found almost exclusively on the surface of prostate cancer cells.
So it ignores everything else.
Basically, yeah. It travels through the body, finds the cancer, and delivers a localized microscopic dose of radiation to destroy the cell without wiping out the healthy tissue around it.
It's essentially a guided radioactive missile.
That's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
But because it relies on a radioactive isotope, it has a half-life.
Right, the physics of it.
Precisely. Lutetium-177 has a half-life of roughly 6.7 days. So from the exact moment it is manufactured, it is literally decaying.
Oh, wow. So you can't just stick it in a warehouse.
No, it's a melting ice cube. You cannot stockpile it. You manufacture it to order for a specific patient for a specific appointment time.
It's like having to deliver a hot pizza globally. But if the pizza gets delayed in traffic for a single day, the pizza literally ceases to exist.
That's a great way to picture it, honestly.
Yeah.
And to achieve that 70% revenue growth, Novartis couldn't just hire more salespeople. They had to engineer a real-time global nuclear supply chain.
Which is insane.
It is. The source data shows they now have over 830 treatment sites just in the U.S.
Wait, 830 nuclear treatment sites?
Yeah. And they strategically mapped out these centers to ensure that 9 out of 10 eligible patients in the country are within a 30-mile drive of a treatment center.
That is just a phenomenal logistical achievement.
And outside the U.S., they have over 580 sites serving 51 countries.
Okay, but as we established at the beginning, no matter how fast you build out your nuclear supply chain, you still have that massive hole in the bottom of the bucket.
Right. The generic cliff.
Yeah, we have to look at the veterans, the legacy drugs, because this is where that 14% generic drag actually originates from.
Yeah, when a blockbuster drug loses its patent protection, it does not experience a slow, graceful decline. It falls off a cliff.
Let's look at Entresto. This has been their cornerstone heart failure drug for years.
Huge moneymaker.
Right. But in Q1, it took a 42% hit, dropping down to 1.3 billion. And the sources explicitly state this is solely due to U.S. generic competition.
Yeah.
And it gets worse. Tecfidera for leukemia dropped 59% to 155 million. And then there is Promacta for blood disorders. It plummeted 66% down to $184 million.
It is just a breathtaking evaporation of value in a matter of weeks.
See, I really want to dig into the mechanics of that drop.
Yeah.
If you are a corporate strategist and you see a drug like Promacta lose 2/3 of its revenue in a single quarter, what is actually happening at the ground level?
Mostly panic, I'd imagine.
Right, but is there any marketing campaign or discount program you can run to cushion a 66% drop, or do you just brace for impact?
Honestly, you just brace for impact because the decision is taken entirely out of your hands.
What do you mean?
Well, the entire healthcare system is legally and financially wired to force the generic transition. When you go to the pharmacy with a prescription for a branded drug that recently lost its patent,
Yeah.
in many jurisdictions, the pharmacist is legally required to substitute the FDA-approved generic unless the doctor specifically writes, "Dispense as written."
Okay, but even if the doctor writes that, the patient's insurance company steps in, right?
Exactly. The insurance provider will simply refuse to cover the branded version. Or they'll place it on like a high-tier copay that makes it completely unaffordable compared to the generic, which might cost $5.
Right.
So the market share vanishes by design. Therefore, the entire corporate strategy isn't about saving Entresto. It's about ensuring that Pluvicto and Kisqali are already approved and generating billions exactly when Entresto falls.
So if the floor is legally guaranteed to fall out from under your legacy drugs, you just have to buy a new floor?
That's exactly it.
Which brings us to where Novartis is studying its cash, because they have been incredibly aggressive in restocking their pipeline, transitioning into what they call a pure-play innovative medicines company.
Yeah, they spun off their generic division. They aren't selling consumer aspirin anymore.
Right. They are focusing all their capital on high science therapeutics.
And they're spending very heavily to do it.
I mean, the biggest headline in the report is their acquisition of Avidity Biosciences for a flat $12 billion in cash.
Huge deal.
Yeah. And Avidity specializes in RNA therapeutics for rare neuromuscular genetic disorders. The documents highlight two specific clinical assets coming over in the deal, Deldeseron and Delsota. But wait, for anyone not deeply embedded in biotech, clinical stage means these drugs aren't even approved to sell yet, right?
That is correct. They are still in clinical trials.
Okay, so I have to ask, isn't paying $12 billion for unapproved drugs an immense financial risk? What if the trials fail?
It is a massive premium, and yes, the risk is incredibly real. But if we look at the strategic rationale, Novartis isn't just buying two experimental drugs.
What are they buying?
They are buying an entire technological platform called xRNA.
Okay, let's break down xRNA. Why is it worth $12 billion?
Because it solves a fundamental delivery problem. Look, for years, we have known that RNA therapies, which essentially give your cells genetic instructions to fix a disease, are incredibly powerful.
Right, like the mRNA vaccines.
Exactly. But getting those fragile RNA molecules into dense muscle tissue without them just degrading in the bloodstream is incredibly difficult.
So they just break apart before they get there.
Yeah. But Avidity's xRNA platform uses specialized antibodies as delivery vehicles to carry the RNA directly into the muscle cells.
Oh, it's like a biological Trojan horse.
That's exactly what it is. And diseases like Duchenne muscular dystrophy or myotonic dystrophy type 1, which cause, progressive muscle wasting, they've historically been tragic and nearly impossible to treat effectively because of this exact delivery issue.
Oh.
So if Avidity's platform actually works safely at scale, Novartis just bought the master key to a whole new frontier of muscle diseases. They're buying the underlying architecture, really hoping it spawns a dozen future blockbusters.
Okay, that makes the $12 billion make a lot more sense.
Yeah.
And they aren't just swinging for the fences with those massive deals. The financial report outlines several smaller, targeted acquisitions, too.
They've been busy.
Yeah, they bought Synovation to get a breast cancer treatment, currently in phase I/II trials. They also bought Excelogy, bringing in a next-generation allergy therapy in phase I.
It might be helpful to quickly define those clinical phases as they really represent the hurdle rate for all these investments.
Yeah, please do.
So phase 1 is purely about safety testing a small group of healthy volunteers or patients just to ensure the drug isn't toxic.
Got it.
Phase 2 is about efficacy and dosing, like does the drug actually do what we want it to do in a couple hundred patients?
Right.
And phase 3 is the massive, incredibly expensive final test comparing the drug against the current standard of care in thousands of patients to prove it is statistically superior before the FDA approves it.
And Novartis actually had some major phase 3 wins from their internal pipeline this quarter, too.
They did.
A drug called Rapsido, which is the brand name for remibrutinib, got positive phase 3 data in chronic inducible urticaria.
Which is a very complex way of saying D.
Right. To translate the medical jargon, it's a severe condition where patients break out in debilitating hives in response to physical triggers like cold or pressure.
It is severely disruptive to a patient's life, and a highly effective oral treatment would be an absolute game changer.
Rapsido also showed great phase 2 results for peanut allergies.
Oh, and the peanut allergy data is a critical detail in their immunology portfolio.
How come?
Well, the current standard of care often involves complex, highly supervised exposure therapies. Having an effective, targeted oral medication, what Novartis refers to internally as a pipeline in a pill, that could completely transform how families manage that daily anxiety.
Okay, so they are spending billions on Avidity, buying up early-stage biotechs, and funding massive phase 3 trials.
All right, lots of cash going out the door.
Yeah. So to keep the shareholders from panicking about all this spending, Novartis is also aggressively returning cash.
Naturally.
During Q1, they repurchased $1.6 billion in shares, which is part of a larger $10 billion buyback plan.
It is the ultimate balancing act of capital allocation.
Yeah.
You have to prove to Wall Street that you can heavily fund the science of tomorrow without ignoring the returns of today.
But as we see in these documents, throwing billions at science doesn't guarantee the medicine actually reaches the patient.
No, it certainly doesn't.
Here is where it gets really interesting, because we have to look at the reality of global regulation. Let's look back at Pluvicto, our radioactive success story from earlier.
Right.
The press release notes that Novartis actually withdrew its application to the European Medicines Agency, the EMA, for using Pluvicto in a pre-chemotherapy setting for prostate cancer.
Yes, they pulled it, and the wording is very specific. They withdrew it following feedback from the CHMP, which is the European Committee that scientifically assesses medicines regarding the trial design.
But the sources explicitly state this withdrawal had absolutely nothing to do with the safety or efficacy of the drug.
Nothing at all.
And here's the kicker. Pluvicto is already approved for this exact same pre-chemotherapy use in the US, in Japan, and in China.
Right.
So logically, I look at this and wonder, how can a drug be perfectly safe and effective for patients in America and Asia, but Europe rejects it? I mean, does human biology fundamentally change when you cross the Atlantic?
It's funny you ask that because logically you'd think a prostate cancer cell is a prostate cancer cell everywhere.
Right.
The biology doesn't change, but the regulatory philosophy absolutely does.
How so? What are they looking for?
Well, regulatory bodies like the FDA in the US and the EMA in Europe, they often demand completely different architectural structures for clinical trials.
Okay.
The FDA might look at a trial's control group, the patient's not getting the new drug, and say, yes, comparing Pluvicto against this older hormone therapy is a valid way to prove it works.
Makes sense.
But the European regulators might look at that exact same trial and argue that the standard of care has evolved and the control group should have received a different, newer treatment.
Oh, so they aren't saying the drug doesn't work. They're saying the test you use to prove it works doesn't meet their specific criteria.
Exactly. Even though the FDA looked at the identical data set and gave it the green light, the EMA wanted a different statistical design.
That is so frustrating.
It is a stark reminder that conquering the cellular biology is only half the battle. You also have to navigate the bureaucratic frameworks of a dozen independent global agencies.
Though sometimes the bureaucracy actually hands you an accelerated win.
That's true.
Because in the same quarter, Novartis secured FDA approval for Cosentyx to treat pediatric hidradenitis suppurativa, making it the only IL-17A inhibitor approved for kids 12 and older with this condition.
And that's a really meaningful approval because hidradenitis suppurativa, or HS, is a chronic, incredibly painful skin condition that causes deep recurring abscesses.
And how does Cosentyx help?
Well, Cosentyx works as an IL-17A inhibitor.
Yeah.
IL-17A is essentially a protein that acts as a chemical messenger in your immune system, triggering inflammation.
Okay.
So by inhibiting or blocking that messenger, the drug literally breaks the cycle of inflammation right at the source.
They also received an FDA breakthrough therapy designation for another drug, ianalumab, targeting Sjogren's disease. And a breakthrough designation is a pretty big deal, right?
Oh, it is a highly coveted status. It essentially means the early clinical evidence is so strong for a serious condition that the FDA agrees to actively hold your hand through the rest of the development process just to get it to patients faster.
Wow. So you have the European agencies telling you to redesign your trials on one side, and the American agencies fast-tracking your early data on the other.
Which perfectly encapsulates the complexity of running an international pure-play medicines company.
It's wild. So let's pull all these threads together.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in.
Looking at this Q1 2026 data, Novartis really is the ultimate real-time case study in corporate survival.
Without a doubt.
You have a massive global business taking a 14% revenue hit simply because the law allows competitors to replace their older drugs.
Yep.
And they are surviving that mathematical certainty by aggressively scaling highly complex logistical nightmares like Pluvicto, while simultaneously spending $12 billion on targeted RNA delivery mechanisms just to secure their future.
It is the bucket with the hole in it, playing out in real time. You just have to innovate faster than you decay.
And if you're looking at your own investments right now, or even just thinking about the healthcare system you rely on, this deep dive really proves a fundamental rule. Past success guarantees absolutely nothing.
Nope, nothing at all.
Just because Novartis made billions on a drug like Entresto for a decade doesn't mean they get to coast. A company in this sector must constantly, ruthlessly reinvent its own foundation to survive.
But the patent clock never, ever stops ticking.
Exactly. But it leaves me with one final kind of mind-bending thought to chew on.
What's that?
We talked about how Pluvicto, this highly complex degrading radioactive therapy, is the new blockbuster saving the quarter. And they are betting billions on microscopic RNA delivery vehicles next.
Bro.
But the patent clock ticks for everything. So what happens in 10 or 15 years when these hyper-complex, personalized treatments fall off their own patent cliffs?
Oh, wow.
Right. How does a generic manufacturing company even begin to safely mass produce and distribute a generic version of a highly targeted, decaying nuclear isotope? I mean, the bucket is never going to stop leaking, but the water we are dealing with is getting infinitely more complicated to replicate. Just something to think about.
That is going to be a fascinating regulatory and logistical challenge for the next decade.
Truly. We'll see you next time.